India have spanned civilizations, and they have served people with their contemporary and modern needs across millennia. Unfortunately, in recent times, the craft sector has been struggling, and the livelihood of the country's artisans is at stake. In these times, it is our responsibility to come forward and play our part in uplifting the Karigars of India. Ladies and gentlemen, we are extremely proud and fortunate to have two eminent personalities, or other legends, of this industry on our esteemed panel today, who have devoted their lives to uplifting the artisans at the grassroots level and revolutionizing the craft sector of our country. Our first panelist for the session, Jaya Jaitly ma'am, is an author, activist, and Indian handicrafts curator. Founder of the Dastkari Haat Samiti, she has always had a seamless love for Indian arts and crafts and has worked ceaselessly for its revival. A pillar of the craft industry, her contribution to the craft sector of India is unparalleled, and we are delighted to have ma'am amidst us. Ma'am, namaskar, and a very warm welcome to the Virasat Craft Conclave. The other panelist who shall be gracing this session with his presence is Sharda Gautam sir, the Zonal head of Tata Trusts. Passionate about Indian arts and crafts, he is closely involved in the conceptualization and implementation of the Antaran initiative, a craft-based livelihood program by the Tata Trusts, which aims to revive ailing handloom clusters through an end-to-end program. Working in the domain of craft for over 11 years, Sir is an inspiration for all, especially for budding entrepreneurs like us. We look forward to gaining some valuable insights from you. We welcome you, the Virasat Craft Conclave, sir. So, like beginning with the session, it's indeed a delight that both of you have had a robust experience in the craft industry. From the time you started your journey in the craft sector to what it has become today, what do you feel have been the major changes? We would love to know both of your experiences, starting with Sharda sir.
Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. I think fundamentally speaking, crafts, if we look at before industrialization started happening in India and across the globe, one fundamental change that has happened is in the use of the raw material and key ingredients that go into the making of the craft. While we may have same Banarasi sari or same Pochambali sari at the moment, but if we look at a piece which perhaps some of our grandmothers might have preserved, and if you look at those saris, there would be a subtle difference. The difference would not mean the level of skill, but fundamentally the difference you would observe at the level of the fibers that are used, colors that were used. For example, long back when BT cotton was not introduced into the country, there were indigenous breeds of cotton that were grown all across the region. And even if the same technique was used, let's say in two different neighboring districts, and if they were producing their own breed of cotton, you would find that there was a difference in the product that was being created. Perhaps that fundamental difference has gone from almost all the places across the country, barring few geographies where still indigenous breeds are grown. So I think what is fundamentally required for preservation of crafts is we make sure that the supply chain part, wherein the key ingredients, dyes, and the raw material, when I talk about handlooms, comes in. That's where I think we need to make sure that we are in a position to reintroduce what existed traditionally, which had its own merit. And where we are working right now, where we have tried to reintroduce the Naga tree cotton, which in earlier times was used by artisans. And the best part was that despite being a hilly climate, which was severely cold, artisans there very seldomly used wool. So it was primarily tree cotton, which was hand-ginned, hand-guarded, and hand-spun and hand-woven, which was able to provide the degree of warmth that was needed in a very colder climate like that is prevailing in Nagaland. But now with gradual introduction of acrylic and polyester, which has now become kind of mainstream, even with the loin loom weavers there, that value has gone. So it is very important that one reverts back to the original ingredients that were important. And I'm laying a very important stress on this point, because without that, you may have the aesthetics of it alive, but the core component would be gone.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your views on this. It was very insightful. We would love to know your views on this too, Jayaji.
My views on the same topic.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear? The
Sorry,
internet doesn't seem to be very good.
ma'am. We would love to know your views too on this topic.
I
The
think
major
the
changes in the
internet is
craft
not
sector.
very clear.
Hello, am I audible now?
Well, I'll have to say that Sharda ji has worked for 11 years and I have worked 4 times longer. So I have very many stories and very many changes it would take very long to say all that. But from the time I started, which was in mid 60s, I started in Kashmir, where the skills were beautiful, but nobody went to Kashmir. Nobody really came out from Kashmir. Nobody saw anything good. And only tourists who did not know very much about quality and possibilities would go there. And from that state, when I would sometimes bring things from their work to Delhi, very little market was actually open, except for central cottage industries and some state emporia, which were then not even, I think not all were open. There was really no marketing of craft. Although interestingly enough, the budget of the central government for the craft sector was more than it is today. So it's very funny how this situation has arisen that today the world has changed so much. Everything is about the word market. Everything is about business. Everything is about business plans. Everything is about enterprise, entrepreneurship. And market is the king. You get a market and you reach somewhere. You don't have a market and you don't have anything. There are so many markets being created today. I'm talking backwards now, from today backwards. Today you have so much technology. Then we used to have to book a phone call and maybe would get through 2 days later. But today you can just click any part of the world and talk to anybody you feel like in a moment. And karigars today are also adept on Facebook, WhatsApp, and all kinds of things. So these are massive changes that I have seen from the time we started. We had, when I first came to Delhi after Kashmir in the late 70s, I used to travel a lot. For 11 years, I traveled in Gujarat. We used to travel in non-AC cars to areas where there is no water, no greenery. We would be covered in flies in some village where you had to sit. Today, all those kind of villages are booming. Ajrakpur and all are on everybody's lips. Huge lots of things have happened, but I'll tell you one significant thing. There has been a lot of positive change and development where the craftspeople themselves are entrepreneurial, are enthusiastic, are not apathetic, and who don't wait for government to help them. I think this attitude is a wonderful attitude and a huge change. The other thing that has happened during the mid-80s was that design became a big word. So there were a lot of design inputs. Earlier, they were all traditional, it stuck to traditional. Everybody who did painting did Ramayana, and who did something else did the same old Samavar. Whatever it was, there was no change, and people got fed up of seeing the same thing. So if you bring the same thing out into the market, there would be no buyers. So these things have changed. The huge design institutions like NID, NIFT, private designers, brand names. Brand was a word nobody ever used. India was a brand. People have often told me about branding. I said, when my karigars sit at Delhi Haat, I think Delhi Haat is enough of a brand. If there's a genuine craftsperson sitting there, the atmosphere and the name and the place is enough of a brand. Why do we need branding? Because branding means possession. Whereas our craft has always been possessed by a community, by a whole group of people, not individuals. So while the design world has branding and name and copyrights and logos, the karigar, the whole village does the same thing. They may share better or worse from each other, but they help each other. So there are today a new thing of coming together, these sort of old kind of thinking, modern, a bit corporate thinking. And it's people like me who try to marry the two and make the other two not clash, make not the corporate dominate on the karigar and not let the karigar be helpless. So there are such fascinating things. And I think I was told I should talk about some of the major projects I did, which I'll do later. But I think the kind of work, new work that I've been able to do has been very inspiring for me. I can't say I'm inspired by anybody other than the karigars themselves.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your views. It was really insightful and enlightening. So, Jaya ji, you gave birth to the idea of permanent hearts or craft bazaars, and you founded the Dastkari Haat Samiti. All of us would really love to know what gave you the idea to start this, and how has your journey been till now?
Well, you know, Dastkari Haat started because when I travel all over India, you see the village markets, Bastar Haat of the tribals. You see, Guwahati was named after the Goa meant Supari. So the main mandi for Supari was Guwahati. So it became Guwahati. So like that, the word heart is available all over the country. And whether it's in fishermen's areas or tribal areas or anything, handloom areas, the heart was a lovely structure we still have, which in Europe they call farmers markets. But in farmers markets in Europe too, you have people selling their own handmade studio craft. But our karigars and the farmers were always linked together. So always when there was a market or a heart for foodstuffs, there would also be carpenters, ironsmiths, all kinds of other people would be there, sharing materials, sharing barter system, all this. And the best thing about a heart was that it was very flexible and informal. You could take a few hours, sit there, bring your stuff, finish it and go. You didn't have to pile up a lot of stocks, which we need to do if you're running a shop. So you made what you could and you sold it and you went back with cash and you made again and your family had their meals. So that whole idea I found beautiful and flexible. When globalization came and everybody talked market, this, that, and the other, and we were opening up markets for various companies to come in, and Coke and Pepsi and all came rushing into India. I said, if we're opening markets, Indian markets for them, why can't we open urban spaces for karigars to come? Our rural people need access to the market just as much as Coca-Cola needs Indian customers. So we should be fair to our own people and make place. So I made understanding the structure of a rural heart and the timings and the flexibility and the rotational quality. Sometimes you would go to a heart, sometimes you would not participate. So that's how I planned it very thoughtfully, that if Delhi had that, then it wouldn't always go through middlemen. It wouldn't have to go outside and stand outside a government emporium and get your stuff approved, pay a bribe if you had to. Here you could come, sell, and 2 weeks is enough. You could make enough products for 2 weeks. And so I made this rotational system. Pay their own rent. Everything used to be TADA. So the karigars became like government clerks. TADA दोगे तो हम आएंगे. तो TADA भी दो, सामान के लिए भी करो, बेचो, और फिर वो बेचने का कीमत was not a right कीमत, because it was not the actual price. It was a highly subsidized price. So I used to tell the karigars, why do you need subsidy? One day the government will stop it and you will be stuck. You won't be able to sell. Make cost in your travel to Delhi, cost your stay, cost your food, cost the rent you have to pay at Delhi Haat. Add that to the price. It was still cheaper at Delhi Haat than any shop. So they understood that the real value of the product is when you add all these costs. So it was a teaching experience, learning experience. Designers came and taught karigars new ideas. Customers would come and say, "Acha, isme hara moti lagaya, ab mere liye peela aur lal moti lagao." So customers would be designers, giving them ideas. Karigars would learn one from the other कि oh, इन्होंने painting frame करके लाया तो अच्छा बिक रहा है, तो हम भी frame करके लाएं. So there's a beautiful open idea market for ideas also. There was no VIP culture, no senior, junior, no uncha karigar, nicha karigar, or some housewife. If she was genuinely a craftsperson herself and was properly registered, she could also be there, but she won't get any extra facility or try to be swanky. So I tried to make it egalitarian. Anybody can come, anybody can sell as long as you're genuine. And people got to see skill demonstration, which earlier in a shop you don't get to see. So Kani shawl mein itna mehnat hota hai, the Kashmiri shawl, when they saw, they were willing to pay 2 lakhs for that shawl. Otherwise, they would say, why so expensive? These kind of huge learning experiences were possibilities which I thought would work, and luckily it's worked, but it's worked so well that today all greedy traders want to sit there and not push out all the karigars. So there's a lot of sad story also going on now, but that was the story behind Dilli Haat.
Thank you, Jayaji, for taking us through your inspirational journey. It was indeed a pleasure to listen to you, and I'm sure all of us will be highly motivated to create an impact in their own little ways. So, coming to you, Sharda sir, can you please take us through how the Antaran initiative started, what it is, and how your journey has been till now? So you are on mute.
Yeah, I was on mute. So Ritesh, if we look at the craft sector, I'm sure my experience is nothing compared to what Jayaji and various senior members today in the conference have. But if you look at it from someone who has worked very closely, stayed on the ground and worked with the artisans, I think there were a couple of things which were clearly not happening with the artisans. If we look at the common narrative which we hear, that younger generation is moving away, which is in fact a fact, that younger generation is moving away. And if you try and understand the key reasons why that's happening, people often tend to assume that it's primarily remuneration. But it's not just remuneration, it's also about respect. It's also about reward of being in that profession, which the next generation is not able to visualize. That was fundamentally hampering. And I think the various surveys around handloom census that happened in 1995 and 2009 kind of validated that this shift is happening. And the census, we all know how the census figures were calculated in terms of number of days of engagement which an artisan was doing to account for the total number. So number, practically speaking, who were working for 7-8 months in a year was definitely much lower than that what census was able to capture. So when we saw this grim situation, we tried to understand what are the reasons. I think what fundamentally happens is people tend to assume that the reasons are related to design, reasons are related to raw material supply chain, reasons may be related to technology, and which to a certain extent also play a role. But then what we did was we also tried to understand what were the reasons when, let's say 40 years, 50 years, 60 years back, when people were trying to work in the craft space. So fortunately, there was an industries conference report that was available, which was done in 1947. And when we browsed through the report, the key parameters that were highlighted as the key problems in the craft sector, again included technology, again included raw material supply, again included markets, again included low demand, lack of education, as the key factors why craft sector is not growing. So does that mean that in last 70 years, we did not make progress or make headway around any of these factors, or these were just the symptoms of the problem and problem was lying somewhere else? Apparently, when we try to analyze the changes that have happened in the craft sector, and one factor that I mentioned you was the raw material, you draw a very basic comparison between what exists now and what existed 100, 150 years back, you find certain fundamental changes. One fundamental change was that when artisans, let's say handloom weavers, when they were weaving, they would use natural fibers, they would use natural dyes. If at all chemical dyes were introduced, they were the chemical dyes were still not very carcinogenic the way we have now, the lower grade naphthol-based dyes that we have got at the moment. If you look at the products that were being prepared, people would know the customers' taste and preferences because buyers were locally from the same district, maybe from the state capital. So understanding about the language in which the buyer would speak and buyer's requirement, what Jayaji mentioned, Dilli Haat was trying to reciprocate and create for the artisans as a buyer's feedback, existed to them next door. So for their fathers or grandfathers, if you look at Northeast, their mothers and grandmothers who were selling outside, they knew the taste and preferences of the customers very closely. They knew the language of the buyer, and therefore it was very easy for them to decipher what their requirement is. Supply chain was very localized. For example, cotton was grown locally in a neighboring district and they would get it. Dye pigments were grown locally, they would get it. Supply chains were not fragmented. And the best part that existed was, since you knew your customers, you were able to prepare products which were not a mechanized mass-produced good, because you knew that your customers are looking for something very specific. The moment industrialization started happening in the country, you would find that artisans, because their lack of exposure and awareness, and possibly because of lack of education and low penetration of internet at that point in time, auto-assumed that there is a competition with machine-made products. And when you assume that you have a competition with machine-made products, because that is what you see in your local shops, let's say in Maniaband or in Noapattna or in Andhra Pradesh, in Venkatgiri, you would find that a natural instinct comes to your mind that, yeah, this is what is being sold, so this is what I should produce. So there you saw simplification of the motifs that you were using. You saw that weaving a very lighter product, which is of low cost, is something which is of merit. So you started gradually diluting the core strength that you had, which was natural fibers, weaving intricate right motifs, placing them in a right manner, making sure that you do not introduce deliberate defects. There are effects which come into handwoven product, but there are deliberate defects which you tend to do when you try to produce in a mass volume environment. So such things started coming in. That was definitely happening, and the craft dilution that was happening, we realized that was one fundamental reason why crafts were not able to realize the true worth which actually Indian craft embodies. Second change which we observed, and that Jaya Ji I think also mentioned in her talk, was the shift in the market. So earlier when I said that markets were local, customers who are known to the artisans and therefore they knew what has to be produced. But when markets started moving out and there was a small special category of slow fashion lovers or textile lovers or sari lovers who started moving and were located mostly in metros or maybe outside the country, the language of communication started becoming very, very different. Now, when this was happening, all of us as youngsters, we were studying in different colleges. We had exposure to education. We had exposure to computers. We had exposure to internet. But for artisans' children who were staying in remote villages, who would start weaving the moment their feet start touching the pedal of the loom, for them to have the luxury of getting education for 4 years, 5 years in a good design institution or a good business institution is something which they can never fathom. Their parents could never afford to. One. Two, the educational criteria that exists in these design institutions was something which was very alien to the children of the artisans. And even if they were able to make it to these institutions, the cohort which would come into these institutions was very different. So for them to take advantage of the changing circumstances and improved marketing opportunities that was emerging into the country were very limited. So these two were fundamental areas which we recognized as something which is bothering the craft sector. So therefore, we looked at what were the alternatives that existed for the artisans with regard to making sure that their products reach to the buyers. Three key forms of market interfaces started working for the artisans in last 45-50 years. One, there were collectives, the producer institutions that were created either initially as cooperatives and later on as producer companies. Of late, you saw emergence of various not-for-profits, some of them very, very benevolent and try to position the artisans and connect them with buyers and act as market interface artisans. And third category, which whom we often assume as villains, but they are not necessarily villains, was the master weavers, the master artisans who were acting as interface for the artisans to the buyers. In all three categories, in our assessment, when we did, because Trust has been funding for last 45-50 years to different not-for-profits working in the craft space, we found that invariably for majority of the artisans who lied in the low skill and the mid skill range, for all the artisans across these three market interfaces, income of the artisans has ranged between 3,000 to 7,000 rupees a month. Now that income level is not sufficient for next generation to continue, even if we forget the case of reward and respect for them to continue in this sector. So therefore, a reversal on this front somewhere was needed. Now, there were two experiments which indirectly were supported by the trust. One was the handloom school, whose funding first grant came from the trust, and second was the Somaya Kala Vidyalaya, where the initial pilot suggested that if you work with the aspirational and creative artisans, try and nurture their skills around business and design in a manner so that they're able to absorb and assimilate that knowledge and then connect them with buyers, there is a possibility that a larger share of the value chain in its true form with reward and respect would flow in there. So that became our fundamental premise, that when we are working with the artisans here, we are not looking at forming a collective or Tata Trust becoming a marketing interface for the artisans. We are here to make sure we'll identify the creative and aspirational ones. When we broadly use the term artisans, I think in my experience, and which may be wrong, Jaya Ji may correct it if I'm wrong, but in my experience, if you look at artisans are not monoliths. You've got mazdoors, you've got karakars, and you've got karigars. So there are Mazdurs who would simply do anything today, whatever is told to them, they would continue doing it as long as it is rewarding. Then the next day something else is rewarding, whether it's Manrega or a better job, they would move to it. There are Kalakars who would put their heart and head into it and would produce something which is very, very creative. And there are Karigars who would be able to do something creative, but not so very often. So our focus was to work mostly with the Karigars and Kalakars with an assumption that if they start becoming role models for the artisans in the cluster, the Mazdoor types will also see a potential in this. So the first fundamental thing that we introduced in Antaran was to focus on identifying the creative and the aspirational artisans and start working them on educating around basics of business and basics of design. Now, why this education? Education is always enlightening. If you, Jayaji also mentioned that NID and NIFTs came along 1960s, 1970s. If you go back to 1800s or 1700s, there were no NIDs or no NIFTs. Then who was educating, who was creating new designs? It was the artisans who with their own instinct were able to develop newer designs. Now, if you are able to complement that inner instinct that exists with the science of doing that design, you perhaps can have a textile designer right now sitting in the cluster who may not be able to speak very fluently in English or in Hindi for the outside markets, but would start understanding the jargons that the fashion industry uses when they develop a new textile. So that became the fundamental for the introduction of business and design. Second shift which we did in terms of education was, when you look at the markets which have moved beyond, which may require sometimes travel, and people may travel for different events, exhibitions, and reach out to buyers. But there are also cases when artisans are not able to travel. And that's where technology would play a very, very important role. Now, unfortunately, Instagram and Facebook, which are like new days kabutar for making sure that the connect between an artisan and a buyer happens in a rightful manner, is something about which they were devoid of. Some of them may had access to smartphones, but were not in a position to comprehend how to use right hashtags when you're putting your products or images on Instagram and connect with right set of buyers. Now that required very basic education, exposure, and some bit of facilitation so that they start seeing the benefits themselves. And I feel very happy when I see Lovitoli or Veku from the most remotest part, that is Nagaland, and you start seeing that they do roughly business of 4.5, 5 lakh rupees while managing their own families, because they are all domestic weavers. They were managing their kids and piggery and poultry along with, while they were weaving on the loin loom, which is in itself is a very slow paced production. So that connect definitely happened. So these three fundamental things we introduced in with regard to education. Second, and before I take a pause, was when we looked at the Handloom School and Somaya Kala Vidyalaya approach, there were two contradictions which existed. One, both Maheshwar and Bhuj became flourishing clusters because of excellent work which Mrs. Holkar or Jayaji or several other people who are working in Bhuj had done. And you saw that ecosystem in these clusters were well in place with regard to the pre-loom and the post-loom services. Whereas the key problem is not with, I'm not saying the problem is not with Banaras or problem is not there with Pochampalli, but there are hundreds of clusters dying a silent death which are lesser known. So therefore we decided that we'll focus on the lesser known clusters and leave the very, very popular clusters, because there is certain degree of influx of buyers and designers. So there is still a possibility that some way around exists there. There is some kind of connect which exists, but the lesser known clusters are dying a silent death. So although Nuwa Patna was very popular, we took Maniaband, which was about 5-7 kilometers from this place. We took Kamru cluster instead of Sual Kuchi in Assam. So these were the clusters that we took. And we're knowing very well that in these clusters, one will have to very intensively work on the ecosystem. So ecosystem would include, for example, revival of the tree cotton in Nagaland, or revival of the eri silk hand spinning, which exists in Kamru clusters. So unless and until you work on those fronts, you will never be able to actually create the right value chain that this sector deserves. So these were the key pointers I think that we took up when we look at the current program.
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us about this wonderful initiative and your inspiring journey. It was indeed very motivating, and I'm sure that as we reach towards the end of the session, we will have learned a lot from you. Jaya ma'am, you have assisted in curating NCERT syllabus for craft heritage in Indian schools. Do you think that Indian craft sector has the potential to absorb our youth looking forward to making their careers in craft and providing innovative work to them?
I'm not very sure how much the NCERT syllabus helped, because we did it with the good intention of offering learning so that people can go into different kind of professions, not just the standard things, but with the knowledge of craft, even those in business. They did not talk about craft. At that time, even fashion did not talk about craft. I used to have to talk of fashion designers. Why are you forgetting Indian thing? You're just imitating the foreigner. You will never be best. You will be always second best. So bring in Indian craft, Indian textile, and that when they started doing that, then it became special. So the effort was in that NCERT to make people understand that you can work in craft and still do many other professions. Even law, I mean, so many, look at this GI law, GI needs legal assistance for craftspeople, legal the craft life and the craft world to be able to help them properly to register under GI or even GST things. So even some boring person learning maths and tax issues can help karigars better. But I don't think people looked at it that way, because unfortunately also parents want their children to learn subjects which will get them a lot of money by going abroad. And how do you do your SATs after that, which thing can get you a big fat corporate job, and all of that happens. I think the world is divided into those who want to do Gramin Seva type of work and those who want to do Apna Seva and make a lot of money type of work. So it depends on that. But I think that Dilli Haat helped in educating the youth a lot. I always find that Dilli Haat, young people wander around. Sometimes they'll be arm in arm and my carigars will say, ये आप आपस में एक दूसरे के आंखों में देखते रहते हैं, हमारा माल नहीं देख रहे, ऐसे कोई बात नहीं, शादी करके माल आप उनके घर के लिए आप इसे लेंगे. So this sort of funny thing used to happen, but I still find that right from babies in prams to elders in wheelchairs, entire age group comes to Dilli Haat, and in fact 3/4 of the people who come to Dilli Haat are young people. That is what is most heartening for me, because now I've been watching Dilli Haat for 30 years. Every generation, that means every 10 years, it's still always the same new young people. It's not the Puranawalas who got hooked and now are middle-aged and coming. So that has been a big education. My Google Arts and Arts and Culture project, which I want to mention here because all of you are so keen on technology, is that if you download an app which is free called Google Arts and Culture, and you log into something called G.co/crafted in India, all one word. If you write it down, it's well worth it, because young people love to be fiddling on their mobile phones. And here, if you download this app and look into it, you will see that we did 52 stories of 52 different crafts in 52 different locations in India over 2.5 years, and we're still not finished. It's paused because of COVID. We have done we've shown the community and the ethos and the environment of those people, then the entire process of how they produce. Then we've shown all the kinds of products they produce, and then what do they do with it? Do they wear it? Do they use it themselves? Do they market it, or what? And we took about 11,000 photographs. And these photographs are fantastic. My photographers were wonderful. We have just enough text and caption and all to tell you. It's very detailed with metadata of everything. So you know who took the picture, which day, which gown, where, whatnot. And it's such fun that you all like color coding and things like that. If you press, there's one place where if you press, say, bright yellow, all the pictures we took, which are prominently bright yellow, will show up first. If you click what can I shop for my home, you click that, you will get all the pictures of the products where we have done something which can be used at home. So Google and we worked out that. Google worked on the lovely fun technology and you can see it in all kinds of different ways, but they are beautiful, well documented and researched and photographed stories. I think young people, that's the way they will learn from now on. That's the way to get crafts to them. It's also been adopted by the tourism ministry, saying, travel to that place and bring back a craft. So it's a marketing effect also. You encourage tourism and you go there, you see what's happening there. Nagaland basket, the Angami basket we showed. It's a fantastic village where all the villagers are committed to keeping their environment green. So they've got all the laws and rules that they have made themselves about what trees they can cut, what they should plant, what they should do. All this is there as a lovely education. So you can travel there and you can see the craft, you can buy it, and you can also learn about the country and the craft. So that's another way of getting the youth into something in a new way. So one other thing which I did was reverse, not educating the youth of India, the shopping youth, but the karigar, was that so many karigars, I think Sharda would also find that, many karigars come and feel hum log garib hai, hum log unpad hai. And they would feel they don't know English and they don't know computer. So they feel unpad and garib. I used to be very annoyed with them. I said, you know, English is useful, yes, but English is not the end all and be all of everything. We are so proud in India that we have 22 official languages, 700 or more other languages, dialects, spoken living languages. And look, why do we throw it away for learning some half-baked English word and shoving it into a whole sentence of Hindi and making no sense either way? Learn the beauty of your language. And if you are a national awardee, Razak Bhai Khatri, national awardee, Mahan Admi of Kutch, how are you going to tell him कि ठीक से लिखना पढ़ो, calligraphy सीखो और उससे करो? So people who did not know how to read or write, those who never bother about their language or their script, I made many karigars understand what is calligraphy. And through calligraphy, we made them learn to beautify their own scripts, which are Indian scripts are so beautiful. I don't know Bengali, but I love to look at the Bengali script. Then all the Telugu script, the Malayalam script, which are, why are some round, why are some angular? The stories and the mythology and the details, academic details about how our languages developed is so fascinating. The karigars had to go back to learning how their languages developed. What beautiful shlokas or dohas, or what do you have in your language that you can do in your work? So we had 21 craft skills, 16 languages, 70 or more karigars doing calligraphy pieces in their own craft. And we had created 150 beautiful museum quality exhibits. And there's a book we published called Crafting Indian Scripts, which tells you the whole project, how we used to use script earlier, Janampatri kaise खूबसूरती से सजा के लिखा जाता था, various things like that, where we forget about our own language and make our poor karigars feel they're useless and unpad because they don't know English. We have a much richer language than many other countries. So I tried to teach them that, and many of them who did not even know how to read or write and used to say, "Hum to bahut bade embroidery, badhiya embroidery karte hain, national award mila." I would say, "Don't talk to me till you know how to read and write." So he would go take his child's school book, learn the alphabet, learn words. Then I told him, "Kashmiri booty ka embroidery karo, uske booty ke paas Kashmiri naam ko bhi embroidery karo." He did 125 booties with 125 naam. It really became a fantastic piece. So I do ulta way. Unpad ko kaise sikhai? Grown-ups how to learn to read and write, how to look into their own culture. We found beautiful songs in Bihar which they sing, which they embroidered when I told them to find something beautiful. This they one of the three of them, they say, "Why did Sita, look what happened, what a miserable ending to her life. If she had married one of our children, we would have brought her more happiness." What a lovely idea, very feminine, non-casteist idea. So these sort of things was a learning experience. So language brought out culture, which brought associated with craft and with script. So many things connected up. Because potential, you don't have to put everything into a syllabus. But with them, every day I get a new idea from them. कि अब कैसे करे, क्या नया काम करे इनके साथ. 2 years ago, I phoned them and I said, गांधी के बारे में आपका कला में कुछ बनाओ. Didn't tell them more. What they asked, चावल धागा का मूर्ति, stone, metal, bandhani, weaving, they all did such amazing group of Gandhi. It became distribution with 2 or 3 cities. So they do so much. They have so much knowledge. I mean, inspiration and creativity in their head. I think most of us really only have to unlock it. Don't have to really teach them much. They know everything. Unlock new possibilities for them. Unlock new windows. How many people have made love work? People wearing masks, people saying vaccination low. Lovely where they tell you, sanitizer, a vaccine lagao. They're modernizing their traditional art and communicating with the public by using their forms. So I would like to share that with public spaces, public commission, kind of work we should direct it.
Ma'am, your network is a bit
Yeah.
unstable. We cannot hear you properly.
Oh,
Ma'am,
sorry. What can I? Funny. Is it okay now?
it's better,
No?
ma'am.
Is it better now?
Yes, ma'am, it's better.
Maybe with a video of Jaya
No?
it may be better.
Okay.
Video
But I'm not talking. How are you?
Ma'am, if you can turn off your video and speak, the voice will be better.
Should I video off?
Yes,
No.
ma'am.
But then what's so fun if you can't see me speaking and smiling and talking? If I put the video off now, but where do you want me to continue from?
Ma'am, from the last couple of
What
lines
was I
now,
saying?
you are audible now. If you can continue from the last couple of lines, you are
Well,
audible now.
Actually, I don't even know. I don't know what I was saying. I speak very extempore, so I don't. Ab jo bola bola, nahi suna to doesn't
All right.
matter.
All right.
It's okay. Should I say anything more now, or do you want to carry on from here?
Thank you, ma'am. Like, it was really heartwarming and inspiring to hear your invaluable thoughts and like such beautiful experiences. And like so far, it has been a wonderful session, and I have been really inspired throughout the course of this session, and I'm so sure that all the others have been. So before we conclude this session, so we would love to know any interesting experience, any story with an artisan community which you would like to share.
I think the favorite one, Ritij, is.
Both of us, Sharda can do. Pardon?
Sorry, Jayaji.
Would you like Sharda to do it first, or me, or both, or what?
Ma'am, Sharda sir is going first. Next, you can speak of
No,
an
Jayaji,
experience.
first. I mean, whatever way it is, fine.
No, what would you like? Some special experience?
Yeah, ma'am, an interesting experience.
My gosh, I think that's an unfair question to ask. Every single moment of my life working with karigars, every visit, everything has been an experience. I can't even think of what all it's. I've had too long a life. Whole day's session to hear my kahani. It's very. Can you hear me though?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you now.
Can't hear?
We can hear you, ma'am.
Okay. Do you really want me to think of some experience?
Ma'am, any
so many
any such
experiences really.
experience you remember?
Well, one experience I have is of an old weaver who for the first time in his life got a chance to go abroad when I took him to a big art fair which happened every year or every 2 years for about 28 years till it stopped. Art in Action, it was called, outside Oxford. And he had hardly been out of Varanasi, but he was a national awardee who had been neglected and nobody bothered much about him. Very sweet person. So I took him and his beautiful stuff to England along with 9 other karigars. He was so happy. He would just, in between, he would lie on the grass and look at the sky. And when the Britishers all asked him, what do you think about being here? He would just say, Bas, main ab khush hu, as if he had reached paradise or something. And the Kashmir, he made a beautiful shawl. And there's a very interesting way of judging craft in that fair. It was called Best of the Best. And they had one very big tent in which each craftsperson, they were European, American, British, and China, and various other country craftspeople participating. So everybody gives their one best piece. So my karigars gave their best pieces, and the karigars themselves have to select who's the best. No other outside judges. So the idea, the criteria was given to them. What is the thing you would like to steal? कौन सा चीज चोरी कर सकोगे तो कौन सा? Naturally, the person won't choose their own thing because you're not going to chori karo your own mal. It was an interesting system. So the karigars all chose Kashmir shawl. Got best. So big celebration, and the Chinese were very upset because they thought theirs was the better one. But we took the cake, and when our karigar went to some very fat brand Malik wala fellow chief guest called to give the gift. And my Kashmiri artisan went onto the stage and said, "Mujhe sirf Jaya ji se gift lena hai, unke haath se lena hai." So the poor Britishers, they got so upset that participation, they never invited us again. So it just shows how we can really conquer the world with our good craft, and how when we always think the Europeans and the English and the Americans know better. I think single one of you, myself at my age, Sharda, next generation, then the young people coming from now, we should realize what wonderful treasures we have. We are the richest country in crafts anywhere in the world. And when without any effort and with honesty and humility, we go to this heart of a huge craft fair, which was so prestigious, and prize in our poor center, we should realize what great wealth we have. And working with them gives you the feeling that you're very rich. In a luxury conference, I was asked, will you speak about luxury? And I said that for me, the only luxury I'm interested in is that I work with karigars who make beautiful things. For me, that's enough luxury. Jaise bahut garam din mein pankha is enough. Bahut thandi din mein one good razai is enough. Like that, I think for people like us workers, all I do more than that could ask for. So I didn't give you any specific, too many instances. There are many, many, many probably better ones. I can't suddenly think of them. But I'm just saying, I want to say that I feel blessed. I'm quite elderly, but if I could live another doing the same thing.
Thank you, ma'am. It was quite a unique and interesting experience. Sharda sir, we are all ears open to listen to your experience.
Sure, Ritik, and I do realize that I think the time is also up and you maybe have awaiting other speakers. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah, Ritik, so I think what Jaya ji mentioned, I completely concur with that we've got extremely rich crafts in the country. Only unfortunate part is that we've got rich crafts, but poorly paid artisans. And that causes pain to my heart, definitely, and the situation has to reverse. One instance, I think, which comes to my heart very often is of Veku Velu from Nagaland. She is a mother. I think she has got 3 kids. So last year when COVID hit all of us, some of the artisans were stuck with their stock and they were trying to dispose it off, sell it off, whatever price they were able to fetch. So that's when I think when we launched the Antaran Artisan Connect, some artisans profiles and their product pictures and their contact numbers were put up. And we intentionally did not put up a payment gateway because our intent was to have a direct connect of the artisan with the buyer. Although objective was more for B2B buyers, but given the COVID scenario, B2C was something which was possible at that point in time. So Veku Volu, when her products were listed and buyers started calling her, looking at her beautiful cushion covers, she sent a message. She learned WhatsApp during this period, and she sent a text message on the group saying that, should I weave or should I speak to these buyers? I'm not able to weave properly, and it is causing disturbance to my work, and I have also got household obligations. So we saw her message and then we replied to the team members. We told her that if you do not want to respond to the buyers, then someone else definitely would do. And believe us, whosoever does it would take away the real share of the value chain. Now, if taking up a phone to answer the call of the buyer disturbs your work, the easier way would be to put up an earphone without going on and off to pick up your phone and to stop weaving. There are certain ways and avenues which one can always find to come out of challenges, and COVID is a challenging situation. So it is very important that you do not leave that market connect part to someone else. Handle it yourself. Believe us, 2-3 months down the line, you would find that this is something which would actually create worth for you. Last I spoke was about to her was about 3 months back, and she was very proudly mentioning this was for a digital conference. So I was seeking her experience, whether she has actually benefited or not. And she very proudly mentioned that this time around, she was able to do about 5.5 lakh rupees of business, majority of it which came online. So her presence on Instagram and her connects on WhatsApp, the buyers who bought from her, the product quality was good. So they kept buying from her. They recommended her to several other buyers. And she realized that this was something which she was able to do while being based in a remote block in Nagaland. So I think that story definitely inspires me personally, saying that for artisans who can actually be the true custodians of the craft, and none of us who are present in this forum or several other forums who speak on behalf of artisans, but in my belief, if you are able to create a situation or a scenario where artisans can themselves be the true custodians, not all of them may be able to take that up, but the creative and aspirational ones who are in a position to do right now can definitely become role models for the community, and they'll be the ones who will be able to safeguard the craft form.
Thank you so much, sir. Like, this was so insightful as well as interesting. And it was such a pleasure to speaking to both of you. I would like to thank you both from the bottom of my heart, Jaya ma'am and Sharda sir, for taking out time of your schedule to join us for this session today and providing us such valuable insights about your journey and experiences. And I'm very sure that all of us here are so inspired by your journeys that they will simply love to follow your footsteps to create an impact in the world in their own little ways. Thank you once again, ma'am and sir, for joining us and giving us such a stellar session.
Thank you, Ritik.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.